So, video games, am I right? Yeah, I'm making one myself. I've always liked video games, from playing mobile games, to console games, to PC games. I don't really care. Here's a little history lesson about how I got to developing a game. When I was 6 years old, I got a 3DS for my birthday. You don't know how happy I was when I got it. I was playing my 3DS to death, literally. But ever since I got my 3DS, I knew that I was going to be making video games, because I liked them a lot. And I already had ideas back then, but I forgot that. A few years later, and I was going to school, just like every other day. But that day we had computer lessons. We always got those lessons every week in my old school. And they were teaching us how to use things like MS Paint. I wish I was joking. But this time it was special. We had to make something in Scratch. Now, I was about 8 years old at the time, and I had no idea what Scratch was, let alone how to use it. So we learned the basics of Scratch, and then we had to make something, but we had to follow some sort of tutorial, but then on paper. And you could not add anything to your game that was your own, you just had to follow that. But I didn't want that. I wanted to make something on my own. A few days later, I started up my computer and opened Scratch. I quote-unquote tried to make games, but they were a bit bad. But I still enjoyed making stupid little games in Scratch. I was getting better and better at Scratch, until one day I was scrolling to my YouTube recommended, and I found a tutorial for Game Maker Studio 2. It seemed very interesting, so I clicked on it. Sometime later I downloaded the Game Maker for myself, but it was so much harder than Scratch. Remember, I was about 9 or 10 years old at the time, so I was too dumb to program in anything other than Scratch. So I was following tutorials and made some totally original games without any tutorials at all. No, why would you think I was literally copy and pasting the code? I would never do that. The closest I ever got to making something original that works was this game I made for my dad's birthday. I did that, and then I decided, okay, I'm just gonna continue making games in Scratch. So I did. I made a few games that I was proud of. Don't know why I didn't upload them to the Scratch site, but now I did. You can play these games for yourself if you want. Links in the description. Scratch may be easy, but I've learned the basics about programming there. You may be thinking, why is this important to the game you're working on? That's not in Scratch, right? Well, it's not made in Scratch. Enough talking, let's just go to the game itself. So one day, Tal came up to me and was like, so, I'm making some random pixel art characters and I wanna make a game with those characters. Then I said, okay, let me see it. Then I saw it and I was like, okay, I'm dust at making games, but we're gonna make this a game. So the next day I was thinking, okay, what game engine am I gonna use? I was thinking, and then I thought to myself, we can use Scratch, but I want the game on itch.io or Stream or anything that's not on the Scratch site. That was a great choice, because if you want to do more complex things, it's almost impossible in Scratch. I then chose for ClickTeam Fusion 2.5 and made this. Yeah, you can see that I switched from engines real quick, because that same day I remembered, oh yeah, Unity exists. But Unity has, let's just say, a few problems. First of all, it's way too big of an engine. Second of all, every time I start up Unity, there are errors. By doing nothing at all in a Unity project, it already has errors. I'm sorry, I'm just a bit mad. Then I remembered, oh yeah, that one engine you were using when you're like 10 or something, maybe a good option. And I was right. So I chose Game Maker Studio 2 for the engine of a Discolored world. Another reason why I chose Game Maker was because it had a drag and drop functionality. It's a bit like Scratch, but it's in Game Maker. You just drag blocks around. If I try to use drag and drop now, I instantly just wanna switch over to Game Maker language, but who cares? I was just starting out. Then I remembered, oh I don't know how to make anything in Game Maker. So I looked up how to make game in the Game Maker 2. Newbie friendly. And I found a great tutorial series by Sean Spalding. He makes a lot of great tutorials for Game Maker Studio too. I knew I wasn't learning from tutorials back then, so I developed a strategy for still watching tutorials and learning at the same time. It's called don't copy and paste the code from the tutorial. I know, it sounds a bit weird, but let me explain. I watch the tutorials, then apply what I've learned and try to make it on my own. If I don't know how to make something again, I just rewatch that part of the tutorial and use it. But I learn way faster with this than I ever did with just normally watching the tutorials. And if they clicked on a box, I clicked on a box. If they wrote a line of code, I did the exact same. So I made a simple movement scripter with controller support, of course, and now the player can move around. I also made keyboard controls that are pretty comfortable. That's a world record for a platforming game. The controls are the arrow keys to move around, the spacebar to jump, and C to use the brush. Now that's great and all, but there's one thing. The player art kinda looks like trash. So Tal made new art and it looks way better than his old art. I put it in a game and it's looking way better than before. Tal and I were also thinking about a story. It's a really basic story and it will get better in the future. If you don't want to hear the story because of spoiler reasons or you just want to play the game first, skip to this timestamp. So the story kinda goes like this. You're in a world without any color, but you're the only thing that has color. And you have to make the world in color. And you can do that is by defeating enemies. But you're not killing them, you're coloring them. When the enemies are not colored, they will attack you. But when they are colored, they are friendly. How you color the enemies is with a weapon. It's a brush weapon. And it can have upgrades as well. Along this journey, there's a little ghost that follows you and helps you. It's basically your companion in this game. Epic plot twist incoming. At the end of the game, the little ghost tries to betray you and make the world discolored again. Yeah, that's what we have. It's not much, but we will continue to develop the story. If you guys have any suggestions for the story, leave it in the comments. I really like reading comments for you guys, and maybe some of the suggestions can come into the game. So, we have a player character moving around with collisions and gravity, but there's still one problem. We don't have a camera. Now, GameMaker has a built-in camera system, and it works great. At this time of the game, it worked good enough. I replaced it later. But the problem is, the game still has color. So, I changed the color of the background from black to grey, and the blocks from red to black. The game kinda looks a lot better now and it was somewhat functional. So I showed the game to Tal and Luca. And Luca asks, this game looks cool. Can I make designs for it? Tal said yes. And now we got another team member working on the game. Yay! Luca made a lot of designs for enemies and bosses, and Tal also made more designs. Now the only logical step to take is making the enemies actually work in the game. So I started working on a weapon system. What we had in mind is some kind of brush weapon that shoots color beams. If you hit the enemy enough times, it will be in the colored version. Tal also made a cool thing that each hit the enemy takes, it gets more colored. That's a great idea and I want to put it in the game, but not for now, because the colored version of the basic zombie guy looks like this. Yeah, we'll replace that in the future. But now with the color brush working, I thought, okay, when is Tal gonna make his brush art? And the answer was 2 weeks later. So I just searched up brush on Google Images and picked this as a placeholder. Perfect. So now with the brush working, it's time for my least favorite part of game development. Making the enemy AI. So I just copy and pasted my movement code in the enemy and removed everything that has to do with player input. Placed a few invisible walls and we got an enemy working. Now I can still improve a lot in the enemy AI, but this is still good enough for now. With the enemy AI done, it's time for an HP system. Now that's really simple to make. You just create a variable called HP. Set that to the amount of HP you want the enemy to have. make a collision system for if the color beam hits the enemy, it loses 1 HP. If the enemy HP hits 0, make the enemy colored and stop moving. But now it's time for a somewhat harder part, making the player HP. Now I just did the same thing as the enemy HP, but if the player hits the enemy, the HP goes down by 1. If the player HP was 0, the room would restart. Now the problem with that is that every frame you collide with the enemy, the HP got lower. So the player HP drains within milliseconds. Now that's not what we want, so I developed a shitty knockback effect and also a pretty good flash effect. I just basically looked for what direction the enemy was facing. If the player hits the enemy, the HP was lowered and you got knockback in the direction the enemy was facing. Now there were a lot of problems with that. Problem 1. If you were coming from the left side while the enemy was going to the right, you got knocked to the right. Problem 2 is you could easily clip into walls. Now I made a system if you were in a wall, you could jump and then you will get sent out of the wall. Now that worked, but we didn't want the player in walls. So the basic enemy AI was working, but it was moving even if you didn't see the enemy. So I made a system that the enemies can only move if you see them on the screen. If you do not see the enemies on the screen, it will stop moving. So with that done, I have a good enough enemy AI. Why I did this is because you don't want the enemy to be on the other side of the map, where you were just doing other things and then you come back and the enemy is gone. So with that done, we had a good enough enemy AI. Now the problem was that the enemies would not react to you, so I just quickly made a system that if you are in a certain range from the enemy, it will see you. If the enemy sees you, it will move faster and it will also look at you. Later I made a system that if the enemy sees you, chases you. Now at this point in development, I was starting to get annoyed by the knockback effect that was really glitchy and bad and ugly. So I made a new system instead. The knockback is completely gone. If you get hit by the enemy, you just become invincible for a few seconds and the enemies cannot hit you when you are invincible. Now I made a placeholder text thing for the player's health, but I think it's time to upgrade. So I made some really nice looking health icons. I put them in a game and it looks a lot better than just placeholder text. Speaking of things looking better, I made some transitions for if you're dead, go to another room, etc. I also made a manual camera instead of using the built-in Game Maker camera system. The reason I did this is because you can add screen shake and all that kind of stuff with a manual camera. You can also smooth out the camera so it looks a lot better. So if the player stops, the camera will look more like this than just completely stopping. Let me know in the comments if I must keep this moving or remove it. I personally think it looks great. Around this time I also made a saving and loading system and a main menu system. And that's what I did for the first month of this game. Now, a little thing, how we got to the name A Discolored World is we just had no idea how to call the game. We're just thinking, yeah, okay, so any name we can come up with, it's good enough. I have to give the project a name. So I came up with a Decolored World. That was like, okay, but a Discolored World. And then I said, yeah, that's a great name. Let's use that. Okay, so that was the first devlog video of this game. Now there's gonna be a lot more stuff. We have a lot of enemies to make. Oh god, I hate enemy AI. We also made a game studio called Soapdog Games. We're gonna just release some games. The team and I started thinking of a remake of one of my 2 favorite Scratch games that I made. So if you wanna see devlogs of that, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you have ideas for the game, let me know in the comments. I really like reading comments. And if you have a good suggestion, I'll probably put it in the game. So yeah. Bye! Oh ja, dit ding. Joost. Ja, Joost komt je halen in de nacht als je hem disrespecteert.